Peer-to-peer texting was the only technology to emerge from the 2016 cycle that I remember being really jealous that I hadn't thought of it myself. Seeing what Hustle did for Bernie Sanders, peer-to-peer texting was a quantum leap.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, an investment fund and incubator for Republican campaign technology. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, we bring you into conversation with the entrepreneurs who build best-in-class political businesses, the funders who provide the capital, and the operatives who put it all together to win campaigns. Our guest today is Thomas Peters, who's the founder and CEO of RumbleUp, one of the leading peer-to-peer text messaging platforms on the right. He's a serial entrepreneur, having founded UCampaign and Switchboard as well. In today's conversation, we dig into the growth of P2P and how Thomas was a part of that. We learn his tips for scaling political businesses and what the outlook is for regulation of campaign texting. Thomas, peer-to-peer texting, which we'll call P2P from time to time for our listeners, has completely transformed the way campaigns contact voters and their supporters. RumbleUp has been at the forefront of that. You were one of the earliest platforms on the right. So first, how did you spot the trend? And second, how did you position yourself to be able to take advantage of that trend?
Peer-to-peer texting was the only technology to emerge from the 2016 cycle that I remember being really jealous of the fact that I hadn't thought of it myself. Seeing what Hustle did for Bernie Sanders, I was just really amazed, and I thought it was just a brilliant idea. And that doesn't happen to me very often. There's a lot of political technology that seems to just be kind of iterative or just taking the next step, but peer-to-peer texting was a quantum leap. So I was jealous of how powerful I thought it could be. But I had UCampaign at the time. We had our custom app business. And one of the things that I learned early on is be excellent at one thing. And already having the UCampaign app business, I could only be excellent really at that at the time. And it wasn't until late 2017 when I found out that Hustle, who up until that point had been working with Republican and Libertarian candidates, had decided to kick Republican and Libertarian candidates and causes off their platform, that I saw a golden opportunity. It really makes no sense from a market perspective to abandon half of your potential client base, but that's what Hustle chose to do. And so I, at that point, saw it as an engraved invitation. And so we quickly put together the prototype for RumbleUp 1.0 and launched it within 60 days of deciding to build it. So it was a real sprint from my development team. It turned out to be a great decision.
So the speed of execution here was key for you because you already had a team of developers who could put together a custom application.
Yeah, we already had the foundation with UCampaign, and UCampaign had about 30 different types of things that you could do on one of our custom apps. And we built the official Ted Cruz for President app in 2016. We also built the official Donald Trump for President app and the official Brexit app. So we had built big apps and built a lot of features on top of that. And so RumbleUp 1.0 was basically the 31st type of thing you could do on a UCampaign app, but it was the only thing you could do. And it turned out the most important thing you can do.
And so fast forward to today, where text messaging, P2P text messaging specifically, is a must-do for any campaign. What do you attribute that rapid adoption of P2P in politics to?
Primarily, it always comes back to the visibility of text messaging. It's the most visible messaging channel. It's ubiquitous. Americans actually sent 1 trillion text messages last year. Wow. It's just a mind-boggling number. And so P2P is popular because text messaging is popular. Americans love it. And still over 90% of text messages are opened and read within 90 seconds of being received. So no other channel has that kind of visibility.
But Thomas, text messaging was around for a long time, right? I remember Bob McDonnell's successful campaign in 2009 as Virginia governor. Scott Brown, 2010, in his special election, used texting. What specifically about P2P that really helped it take off?
It was the innovation of understanding the legal landscape, and specifically that if every text message is sent one by a human being, it avoids the legal risks of blast texting people who have not opted in to receive messages. And that was the Rubicon that had to be crossed for campaigns to eventually become comfortable with texting consumers directly. And so once that had been accepted, and from 2015 through 2020, it was a lot less clear. The Supreme Court decision in the Facebook case in early 2020 really kind of solidified the legal and liability landscape on the side of P2P texting. And that's helped a lot as far as keeping it a continued practice.
Yeah, we'll dig into some of the regulation and policies around P2P in just a few minutes. But I do want to underline and highlight a lesson for our listeners, which is the technology had been around for a long time. Text messaging is 1980s technology, but a couple of things came to the forefront. One is more APIs for text messaging that made it easier for anyone to create their own text messaging application. And two, this sort of legal framework or view that allowed a new application. And so it's a really good lesson in right place, right time, and then being able to take advantage of that. Because I think if you had tried to build something like RumbleUp 3 years earlier, you wouldn't have had necessarily the technology underneath it or the legal support behind it. So I think that's a really interesting lesson that I think is important for our listeners to understand.
That's absolutely right. I actually have heard horror stories of people trying to do something similar to peer-to-peer texting using like Google Messenger and laptops back in like 2013 and 2014. It was very creative, but it required the ubiquity of smartphone apps to begin with. And then, as you said, APIs and application to handset messaging protocols for it to take on. So right place, right time. It's one of the things that unfortunately is very rarely within an entrepreneur's control, but reading those signs is really essential to success or failure.
And I think another thing that has been really important to the success of P2P and RumbleUp as part of that is campaign decision makers are all about the inputs and outputs. And so they know that if they invest some specified amount of dollars into P2P text messaging, that they will get an expected number of results. And so I think that has been very attractive as well. And that's advice I always give to entrepreneurs. The more you can price in line with inputs and outputs, the better.
That's right. And you have to be able to show your work. Even at the early days of RumbleUp, like in early 2018, to me, it seemed such an obviously good thing. Like, what campaign wouldn't want to be able to send people messages in the most visible channel? But they didn't. And a lot of that reason was no one had proven that it worked. And so it wasn't until we won some Poly Awards in 2018 for our texting in the Florida Panhandle for the Florida GOP, which helped DeSantis and Rick Scott win. And we showed like a 10.5% lift against a control group, that light bulbs really went off. So investing in those early case studies is so important with the new technology, because campaigns are savvy buyers and they're not just going to buy your shiny object because to you it's the most obvious thing. You have to show your work.
Right. That's a really good advice for every entrepreneur, not just in the political space. So, Thomas, our listeners have learned from past guests that politics is a relationship-driven business. You didn't come from a political campaign background, but you've obviously built an impressive network over the years. What tips can you give our listeners about how to break into the industry, start making connections, and building those professional networks that turn into customers?
It's even more important in a field like politics where everyone talks to each other. So you have to conduct yourself with integrity, really through and through, not just because that's the ethical and right thing to do, but because everyone's going to hear about it if you try to start talking out of both sides of your mouth. And I remember when I was starting off with a company, you're really, really desperate to make your first sales, to get those first clients. And there's a lot of temptation to exaggerate and to accommodate and all of that. And that's very dangerous, because if you can't deliver once you finally get those clients and you create disappointment, bad news travels faster than good news. So you have to exercise a lot of self-restraint with what you claim to be able to do, because if you actually have a good business model and provide a good product and service, that will have cumulative beneficial effects. And that, I'm very proud to say, is really the reason that RumbleUp has grown so much. Is we take care of our clients, we have a product that works, and we mean what we say. And that's the reputation that I believe we have. It's what people say about us when we're not in the room. And that makes all the difference. Secondly, advice I would give is everyone at some point is going to be important to you. You just don't know when they're going to be important to you. So treat everyone with respect and kindness always. And one of the things that someone else said to me early on, which I've practiced a lot, is reach out to people when they're having a hard time. Reach out to folks when they're in between jobs. A lot of people get fired or let go in this business for not great reasons. One stupid tweet and suddenly comms director doesn't have a job. I don't think that's always fair. Sometimes it's deserved, but oftentimes it isn't. And obviously with campaigns folding and starting up, people are bouncing around a lot. And so helping people onto their next job, regardless of whether it benefits you, is always a great thing, because a lot of the people who I've managed to help out or be a reference for 4 or 6 years ago, now they're running in campaigns and there's already all this trust built up there. And so they're easy to work with. And so don't forget anyone, except people who are being bad. You can forget about them.
So can we maybe get some more tactical advice for folks? Like, is it doing like a happy hour circuit? Is it conferences? What have you found that really works and is worth the investment, both in times of money and time?
Face to face is huge, especially for so much of us in the digital space, the software space. And now, like after 2 years of COVID, I think we have such a hunger for in person networking. So we have always placed a premium on sponsoring in person events, going to in person conferences, hosting events at our space. That's where friendships and trust get built face to face. And that's certainly essential. So tactically, yeah, I look for those opportunities. Coffees are great. I love like a quick coffee with someone, and lunches and dinners. Spend money on your clients. It's the best money you'll spend is breaking bread with someone. And it's a lot harder to say no to, hey, do you want to grab a cup of coffee? Or can I bring you a cup of coffee? Then do you want to get on a WebEx and watch my slide deck? Best advice I ever got. And I'm sure other people have said it, but it bears repeating, is if you go and try to make a sale, you'll make a friend. But if you go and try to make a friend, you'll make a sale. So make friends.
Yeah, that's absolutely great advice, especially for a lot of entrepreneurs who look at software as a service startups and say, oh, well, I just need to have a really good landing page and good SEO and it'll all do itself. And that doesn't really translate well to the political space where it's such a tight network. Thomas, you alluded to the regulation and attention that peer-to-peer text messaging has received because it's been so effective and popular. Obviously, the phone carriers are involved. There are some regulators involved. What's the right balance, in your opinion, between using a channel like P2P and not abusing it, making sure that consumers are protected? Is there some balance or regulation that you would support here?
Yes, there's a long way to go. And I think what the phone carriers have done with the campaign registry for registering 10-digit long codes, basically allowing political campaigns to register their traffic above board, is a great step, because it's creating more transparency in the marketplace, specifically in the text messaging ecosystem. And no one is being benefited by bad text messaging practices that harass people, that send very incendiary messages to begin with. Texting is a very positive medium. People respond a lot better to an unprompted text message if it's carrying a positive, inspirational, or welcoming message, like asking them to share an opinion, than negative messaging. Nonetheless, there's a lot of messaging traffic out there like that. And then there's insufficient penalties for texting vendors that don't respect opt-out regulations, don't respect including the name of the campaign or client that's sending the text message. And so I think the campaign registration process that the phone carriers are getting behind and enforcing will do a lot to clean up the ecosystem, because it's about 5 or 10% of vendors that account for 90% of the complaints. And so that's definitely step number one. And I think over this cycle leading up to 2024, there should be continuing tightening around those standards of making sure that political texting vendors are sending, on the whole, very what's called clean traffic. So traffic that gets positive engagement, people click the links, they respond to the message that's sent to them, they don't complain about it, they don't opt out at rates that are higher than expected in this vertical. So I think those are all good starting points, and I think we can do a lot to clean up the messaging ecosystem following that plan.
It sounds like it comes down to following best practices and being a good text messaging marketer. And unfortunately, there are some bad actors that need to be regulated into that direction, or at least blocked from going that way.
Yeah, there's some people who do this intentionally, that just take money and spend it and don't really care how it's spent. They just, want their cut or whatever. I think oftentimes, though, more often just comes down to laziness. It's hard to run a good text messaging campaign. It's hard to carefully select your data set, do a lot of thinking on the front end about your targeting, do a lot of testing with your message and your audience in small numbers before you blast a huge list, which you should almost never ever do unless you absolutely know that those are your supporters and they're going to respond well to your message. So it is best practices, but it's much more comprehensive than, say, like what the message itself is. I think a lot of it comes down to how much you're doing to understand your audience, to seek reputable data vendors, and to be patient enough, just like with an email campaign, ramping it up slowly and organically before getting that audience warmed up before you start regularly sending content to them. A lot of the best practices in email, I think, translate in a one-on-one correlation to text.
What does all of this mean for the future of P2P texting? Do we anticipate more changes or advancements? Give us a little sense of what the future holds this cycle and beyond.
So yes, it's going to be harder to send bad text messages, and that is a great thing. It is going to be easier to send messages if you have a demonstrated track record of sending good messages. So that's great for the ecosystem in general. I'm most excited about our video texting technology. It's a thing that really took off in 2020 and 2021, but the ability to send high quality videos embedded directly in the text message, I think, is the next logical step for peer-to-peer texting, because we know on every other channel that video is king and texting is no different.
You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Thomas Peters, the founder of RumbleUp, a peer-to-peer texting platform. Thomas, RumbleUp, as you mentioned, is the second product that you've built in the political space. What are some of the lessons that you learned from UCampaign that really helped shape RumbleUp's success?
Yeah, it's amazing. UCampaign was founded in 2014 and we operated it through 2020. So 6 years. It only took 6 years for us to become an overnight success. And it's interesting with watching Trump's Truth Social or his new social network come out and all the struggles they're going through. I feel them because we faced all those same challenges when we were building these custom apps, which are basically private social networks with gamification geared towards getting activists, your top activists, to do the kind of things that help campaigns. So donate, door knock, send texts and emails to your friends and family and personal network, share social media when that was even more important. The lessons that it taught us for RumbleUp, absolutely the importance of stellar customer service. I love what Patrick Ruffini said on your podcast, Eric, about it's not software as a service, it's software with service. That's absolutely true in politics, where you're selling to political clients who are busy, distracted, short of money, short of time, and really normally not in the mood to learn something new. You really have to kill them with kindness. You have to be extremely patient with them, and you have to try to make your software as easy as possible. And when inevitably they have questions, you have to be as fast as possible with the right answer. That's very challenging. It's a very demanding standard, but if you can do that well in politics, you're going to do great in any vertical that you approach, because good customer service, as we know, as consumers, is very hard to find. So UCampaign taught us how to provide customer service for what was relatively a much more complicated product. As I said, UCampaign had 30 different features, and RumbleUp basically just has one. So that was a lot lower learning curve. And we also learned, I'd say the other thing that UCampaign taught us was the importance of listening to the client and understanding what their pain points were, which is why we ultimately abandoned what was a very successful and fun business to realize that campaigns would be better served by peer-to-peer texting in most cases.
Those are some great insights. Thanks for sharing those. I think it is really interesting that you started out with 30 different features and then zeroed it down into that one, because certainly a lesson I've learned over the years is that we have this grand vision for where something can be. And oftentimes we've got to pare back our vision for where campaigns are and the bandwidth that they have, right? So like in an ideal world, we have a fully built out app, but it's tough when people aren't necessarily engaged civically, and we've got to build scale rapidly, that we've got to really focus what our offering is.
Simple is beautiful. I completely agree with you that there's too much praise given to complicated things when actually the hardest things are actually oftentimes the simple things, and it's the simple things that can be the most successful. Think about Stripe. Stripe processes credit card fees. It's a massive, massive, massive business, but it's essential. You almost can't build a company these days on the web without using Stripe at some level. And so if you take all your great ideas, and I have a new great idea every day, and focus on the one good idea that you can be the best at, and that's going to be more successful than anything else. Execution is the hard part.
Well, I'm going to ask you to share one of those good ideas in just a minute, so other people can get to work on that. Thomas, how have you been able to find and source the talent, primarily on the technical side, that you've needed to grow RumbleUp? I know that can be a challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs in this space.
Yeah, it is the challenge. If you're running a temp company, obviously your technology is extremely important. I don't have very hopeful advice here as far as like how you get started, because I really lucked into it. The first developer that I hired was extremely experienced and had no business working for such a inexperienced startup founder as I was, but I managed to sell him on the challenge of the idea and the vision, and that got us far enough to get started and find out that we enjoy working together. The easiest thing to do, the growth hack here, is to find an experienced engineer and sell them on your dream. If you're a founder, you absolutely should give equity to your technical development team that you start with. I think it's really important to have someone who can almost be a technical co-founder, and you're going to have to look for that through your network. But if you can find that first engineer with real experience, so someone who I'd say has worked minimum 6 to 8 years, that person can then be your informal head of HR for the rest of your engineering team. They're not going to necessarily go out and find you, the rest of your engineering team. But when you find other applicants, you can go to this person, him or her, and have a real trusted insight into whether or not this person is going to be a good hire. We're at the point now where our most recent engineering hire was an intern for us, a development intern. And when he graduated college, we offered him a job. And he's growing so quickly. It's amazing. He's under a really good couple senior engineers who can train younger people. So it's about finding that first domino. And I think, yeah, we weren't very well funded. We had very little funding to start with, so I really couldn't offer money. And most engineers can always make a lot more money going to work for Silicon Valley or Facebook or Amazon. So, I used to think that if I just raise a bunch of money, I'll be able to like hire the best talent. And even if I had raised 10 million bucks, I wouldn't have been able to avoid having to sell someone on the vision and the excitement of what we're going to do together. I think it mattered a lot that I wanted to listen to what my engineering team said, and I respected what they told me, and I didn't ask them to do the impossible. So that's where I'd start.
Speaking of fundraising, talk about your approach with RumbleUp to seeking outside fundraising versus using your revenue to grow. How have you balanced that?
So the seed capital was essential. I had a friend in VC world who introduced me to one angel investor who got us a round of seed funding that funded us long enough to net our first client of substance, Ted Cruz for president. And then they did a retrench based on that success. And that was enough for us to get to break even, to get to the black. But that is not how it goes most of the time. I've been a complete abject failure when it comes to raising rounds. I tried to raise a round after our first year with RumbleUp and failed to do so. I'm so glad I failed every single time, because now I have more equity in the company and I have relatively complete autonomy about what I do with the company. It all depends on what kind of business you're trying to build. If you're trying to build a business that will require large scale digital marketing, that will require a large client base to be successful, then it probably makes sense to raise a round. Certainly the way I went without raising a round, I didn't have the benefit of invested investors helping and guiding me and preventing me from making mistakes. So it's a little bit of a trade-off, but as much as possible, the more you can bootstrap and the more that you can take smart money, which is basically, I call smart money investment with investors who care, who actually want to be part of your business, because the money is helpful, but the advice, you really can't put a value on it. And so if I were to do it again, that would still be the kind of money I'm looking for, is investment with an investor who actually cares, is going to be promises to be involved in the investment. I would actually put that in the contract, like stipulating what their minimum level of involvement is going to be, so you can rely on that. And then if you're doing great and you're down that road, secondary investment is more about connections and just the resources to get to market after you've proved traction.
All right. So it's time for some of those ideas. If you were starting out with a new business today, what's one opportunity or problem you'd start working on?
Well, I think in our space, one of the things that I wish existed is a one-stop volunteer recruitment and job assignment board, something like a thumbtack, but for GOP volunteers, because it seems that every campaign starts with the hard task of trying to go out and find people who are super excited about the candidate and want to volunteer. And then even the most successful campaigns will build up this, massive apparatus. Think about like a state, think about a Senate or a governor's statewide campaign. Get hundreds, thousands of volunteers, and then they win, and a lot of those people just sort of disappear into thin air. So it'd be amazing if there was a hub where, as a volunteer or someone who's interested in volunteering, you could, sign up with a simple form and say, here's the kind of campaigns I'd be excited to work for. Here's the skills that I either have or would be willing to do with the amount of experience. Obviously, you'd have to do some vetting around making sure there aren't like plants and stuff like that. That's where it gets a little bit tricky. But I think campaigns would absolutely pay for a service that allows them to go and post a job wanted, volunteer wanted on that kind of site.
That's great. I think that's I really am excited about some of the products that you're seeing on the left, where it is more, software following the voter instead of software following the campaign. So that's a great suggestion for anyone who wants to get started and maybe even get some investment from Thomas and Startup Caucus. I'm glad Thomas was able to join us today for a very fascinating and informative conversation. You can keep up with RumbleUp via their website, which is linked in our show notes, and you can follow Thomas on Twitter as well. As always, if you enjoyed today's conversation, if it gave you some insights or made you a little bit smarter, please do us a favor and share it with a colleague. And if you've been listening for a while, we really, really do appreciate when you rate and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, because it's so helpful for getting discovered for those next generation of entrepreneurs who are trying to get into this space and really need some of the advice like Thomas has shared. So please remember to rate and review and subscribe wherever you are so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time.